Design, the author of Just Enough Research and Conversational Design from a Book Apart. And in her free time, she likes to ride her bike, hang out with her dog, and see live music. So welcome, Erica.
Hello. Thank you so much, post-Apple strudel crowd. I'm so glad you made it here. And hello, live stream friends all over. I'm Erica Hall from San Francisco, founder of Mule Design. I'm excited to be with you. We're going to go on a journey of a lot of information, a lot of idea stuff. Yeah, this is cool. But because my talk is about asking questions, I'm going to start with a question for all of you. And I want you to look in your hearts and answer it really honestly, very candidly. Do you enjoy being right? Raise your hand. Do you like having the right answer? Okay, looks like most of you are truthful people. There. You are right. Hold on to that feeling. Hold on. It's a good feeling. And I'll tell you something about me. I love being right. It's the best feeling. I was that kid in class, you know, the one like, call on me. Jumping in there, right answer, correcting people's jokes, you know, very popular child on the playground. And so then I always wanted to have the right answer. And so then when I went to college, I thought, you know what, I'm going to study philosophy. Because you know what philosophy is? It's the art of winning arguments. So it essentially weaponized this tendency. And I learned how to create the conditions in which I would always be right, because you set the terms of the argument. You know, you define like, oh, we're going to be talking about ethics, and for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to define ethics as this. I'm going to define free will as that. And you can set the terms and create an argument and dominate in your face Socrates. But then I graduated. I went out into the real world, and I'm like, I am the rightest person. I have a degree in right. Praise me, I'm so awesome. But I learned that this desire I had to be right, this good feeling I wanted to hang on to, had a lot of really unfortunate effects. One, it made me really annoying. It made me a very bad listener, because I was that person, you know, you ask them a question and they jump in with the answer before you're even done, and you're like, that wasn't even my question. And the worst effect it had because of that is my desire to be right, to have the right answer, increased the chance that I was actually wrong, because I was not listening. I was just trying to prove how smart I was. So, because of the intervention of many kind friends and colleagues, eventually I got over that. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to find the right answer. That's a good thing. I'm not telling you, like, go out and be wrong and love it. What I'm saying is that it's important to want to find the right answer, but that is not the same as wanting to have the right answer inside and to prove that you're right. But the problem is that throughout our educations and a lot of times in our careers, we are not rewarded for having questions. We're rewarded for having answers. But the truth is that a good question is much more powerful and much more effective than a good answer, because answers have a really short shelf life. Like, say you were designing something for high school students, and you had a question like, how do high school students spend their time? Like, maybe you do a little research and you get some answers and you're like, sweet, we have the answers. But you can't stop there. You have to keep asking that same question. Because otherwise, the world will change, things will move on, high school students will spend their free time in a different way, but you'll still be holding on to that answer. You're like, no, I was done learning. I learned, I did it, I'm done. But this is so often how people in design and business and technology treat asking questions, right? You're just trying to find your answer as quickly as possible so you can move on. And when we're coding or writing or designing, like when you're sitting at your keyboard, You feel like you have so much control, right? Every pixel goes where you want it to go. Every word goes where you want it to go. It's like, I'm creating this new thing. I'm so excited about this act of creativity. But then what happens is you take whatever you've developed at your keyboard in front of your screen and you send it out into the real world where you don't have any control. And people don't necessarily care about what you have to put out there. And the only way to increase your chances of success is to learn about what's going on out in the world, because you can't control it, but you can influence it. And unlike a philosophical discussion, you cannot set the terms. You can't define what's going to happen for people. You can only make assumptions. And those assumptions are risks unless those assumptions are well informed. Because you're like, oh, we're going to assume that people really value what we're putting out there. But if you don't do your research and you don't ask the right questions, you're not going to know if that's really true. So I'll bring it back to a little philosophy. Uncertainty is an uncomfortable position, but certainty is an absurd one. And the problem is asking questions is really, really uncomfortable. And a lot of people who advocate for research, I think, don't emphasize that enough. They just say, of course everybody wants to do research. But you have to recognize that as people who are often really rewarded for having the right answer, asking a question or admitting that you're uncertain is deeply, deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Because being right, that is a good feeling. Not knowing is a really, really bad feeling. And that's at the heart of a lot of the objections to doing the research in the way that we should be doing it. The good news is that you can start wherever you are, just like right now. If you shift your mindset from thinking, oh, having the answer is really, really good and really powerful, to asking questions is really good, and I want to be a curious person, and I want to ask a lot of questions. I don't want to just hang on to that really good feeling. I want to live in that place of uncertainty. All you have to do, is make that shift. And you will be able to start gathering more and more information that increases the chance that you actually have the right answer. But it's going to be uncomfortable. And that discomfort is the greatest barrier to learning. So, the place I like to start is asking the question, why is design so hard? And this manifests in terms of all of the bad design out in the world. I look around in the world as a designer, and I'm very curious, and whenever I interact with something that seems hard to use or awkward or not very aesthetically pleasing, I ask, how did bad design happen? Because, like, you look on Amazon, there are like 10 million books about design. The principles of good design are really, really well known. They're out there. So how does bad design happen? Like, this is a question I have. It's so curious. Because there's so many kinds of bad design. I look at my local newspaper website, and I see some less than optimal design. Like, maybe it looks a little cluttered, but you don't understand. That is all the article content on that page. That's it. That's it. Then there's stuff. I'm not even showing you. There's like 4 more feet of scroll. And I look at that and I think, okay, I'm sure that the people who worked on this know how to design a really effective and easy to read article template. You know, we've designed a lot of editorial sites, but it's like, how did that happen? That's so interesting to me. Or what I call the Jared Spool commemorative example, United Airlines. I am sure that a lot of very intelligent, skilled people worked on this site. And yet this was the result. And this is a little unfair because they've redesigned recently. So but I guess there's an area of focus now, but then there's some other wacky areas with just a lot of stuff. They like Post-its. I think they took Post-its a little too literally in their design process. I'm like, how did this happen? And then you think, well, you know, some companies don't have design in their DNA. You know, some companies are just, they're full of design geniuses who are fantastic and always make good choices. And if you've used iTunes lately, I've been running, listening to my phone, trying to change a song, and I've like thrown my phone across the park because it's like, how does this even work? Marco Arment, the CTO of Tumblr and founder of Instapaper, has this great phrase: "It's a toxic hell stew." So this is an amazing mystery. How did the most valuable company on the planet, who everybody else copies because their design is so genius, how did they do this? How is that possible? And there are companies that have really, really good design and really, really good customer experience. Virgin America, I loved Virgin America. Everything about it was so well thought out. I loved flying on their planes. I loved ordering my food at my seat. I loved the booking experience. They really got it right. They totally focused on what the customer wanted. They don't exist anymore. So I'm here to bring you the bad news that there is no ROI of customer-centered design. There's a business, and there's a set of choices you make, and we've labeled some of those choices design, but just because something is very pleasing to the customer and beautiful to look at does not necessarily mean it's going to be good for your business. And then some things are just mysterious. This looks like a thing that was created by people who knew what they were doing, but then ask, what were they doing? Video bills. Okay, I'll explain this. Time Warner Cable, company that provides access to a lot of video content, thought, maybe while you're waiting for the next season of Game of Thrones, maybe you've run out of things to watch, so you'd like to watch your bill. He's so happy. Oh, it's such an interesting, good, oh no, everybody just got killed in my bill. The red wedding of my bill. And this is bad design because of the opportunity cost, right? Anybody who's working on something like this is not doing something more useful for the world. And sure, you could make a case that, well, video bills are good for accessibility. But hey, why is your bill so complicated that it provides enough material for a video? That's a good question to ask. So, and then my favorite in the last couple of years, many, many millions of dollars went into the innovation and creation and engineering of a device that squeezes bags of frozen fruit. Looks nice, but why? Why? How did this happen, right? So it's sort of mysterious. And I'll tell you, this exercise, this like, how is the meeting, how did this happen, this automatically makes anything really annoying you're dealing with kind of interesting and fun, because you start thinking, how did this happen? Why is there bad design in the world? And there are new ways of having bad design. There are new technologies. So Bank of America, I take this one real personally, has developed an AI assistant named Erica. Yeah, not displeased. Displeased. And you're like, why is it gendered? Why are they calling it she? What's wrong with online banking? There's another sort of marketing campaign that says, tap on Erica. No, do not tap on Erica. Do not tap on Erica. So, what do all of these things have in common? So this is a range of less than ideal design across many media. The thing they all have in common is people. And the reason design goes wrong is because people want to have the right answer. Because somebody had an answer. Somebody said, you know what? I want to have a really fancy machine that squeezes bags of frozen juice, and I'm going to put that out in the world. I want to create, like everybody else is doing AI chatbot things with names and genders. Let's just do one. I want to have it. So the reason why there's bad design out in the world is because people were more interested in defending their answer throughout the process than really asking questions. Asking, like, is this something people need? Do we have all the resources to do it right? Is designing something like this and really serving the customer need, is that really going to help us make money? Or is there something else we should be focusing on in addition that will help our business be successful? And the problem with people is that we're riddled with cognitive biases. You're not meant to, read things on this chart that's based on the Wikipedia page for cognitive biases that I really recommend looking at. The point is that we have so many, I can't even fit them all on one slide. So we're riddled with cognitive biases. We want to be right. And we go into these processes where we're trying to design new, amazing things in the world, because that's all design is. Anytime you want to go from what currently exists to creating something new and putting it out in the world, and this is large or small. You know, this could be a cool new chair, or this could be a whole new system that helps people pay their taxes in a simpler and easier way. Any level of thing, you want to get from the current state, what actually exists, to some better future state. And in order to do that, you have to understand the current state. We've actually had fights with clients when they say, oh, no, we don't want you to think about the way the world is now. We want blue sky. Blue sky. Just imagine the best case scenario. And they think they're making our jobs easier by doing that. But they're not, because any innovation that changes the world fits into the world. But that's uncomfortable, because then we have to ask questions about the world, and we have to think about a lot of really suboptimal things. So a design project, I construe that very, very broadly. All it is a series of decisions. Like, we really like to focus on the artifacts, like, oh, design is creating things and making things. But what it really is making decisions about things. It's making choices. And the reason we need to ask questions and do research is because research leads to evidence-based decisions. And this sounds like it should be obvious, because if you're not basing your decisions on evidence, what are you basing them on? So anytime somebody goes into a design process without doing research, ask, what are their decisions based on, if not evidence? Fear, confirmation bias, having an answer they found a long time ago. People like to feel in control, right? Because uncertainty is so uncomfortable. And so they even like to, when they talk about like different ways of gathering information, how often is there a diagram like that where it's like, oh, let's just put it in little hexagons. Let's make it tidy. Let's control it. This is just a natural impulse to deal with how messy the world is. But the world is messy. And a key to this, a really important part of doing design research, is collaboration. I'm going to talk about it for a moment, because open source software, that's pretty collaborative. But then maybe you go out into the world, or you're dealing with clients, or you're in a business context, and all of a sudden you feel like, oh, we're not collaborating so well. What's going on? There's all nice people here. Collaboration in business is so rare, there have never been any actual photos of it. That's why you see this. That's why stock photographers are like, oh, I've never seen people collaborate. Yeah, put all your hands in. Sure. People can work alongside each other for a decade and never truly collaborate. Because all collaboration means is working together towards a shared goal. But a lot of times people never check to make sure all the people working together actually have the same goal. And collaboration is hard for some of the same reasons design is hard, right? It's hard because of ego, because people like to have the right idea. They like to have the winning idea. But I don't really blame people for that, right? Some designers have a bad reputation, like, oh, they're so egotistical, they want everybody to listen to their designs. But what we call ego is really a problem of bad incentives. A lot of organizations reward the person who confidently says an idea. And that's why we run into issues with bias and discrimination in the workplace. And you hear about people stealing other people's ideas. Why would that even happen unless the organization was rewarding an individual contribution more than rewarding a team achieving a goal? So I don't blame the individual, I kind of blame the system around them. Organizations put people in silos, right? It's like, oh, visual designers here, researchers here, developers here, back-end engineers over here. That's not how anybody experiences a product, service, software out in the world. It's not like, oh, now I will look at the code. Oh, now I will look at the words. But people aren't put in a cross-disciplinary collaborative situation. And a lot of times there's competition for internal resources. Oh, we're all supposed to be working together, but no, you get the researcher, I get the researcher, you get the writer, right? And so then you're not in a really good position to be collaborating with each other. Or people are far apart, either physically or conceptually, with no facilitation. It doesn't just happen on its own. Like sometimes you do get an organization where you can sort of walk by somebody in a hallway and like, oh yeah, we have to resolve a small conflict. But without good facilitation, collaboration does not happen on its own. And academic research, right, is not traditionally collaborative. So when you just bring research into an organization, a lot of times what that organization will do is just put the researchers over in a corner. Like, I talked to some people who worked for a large technology company who said the researchers literally had a different building with like a different air circulation system. And so you'll get the people learning the knowledge over here, and then the people solving the problem, making the decision over here. And if that's not being brought together, you don't have well-informed, collaborative decision-making. You don't have the conditions for good design. Collaboration requires both intent, people have to want to do it, and they have to be rewarded to do it, or people will do the thing that they're rewarded for. And a lot of times people are more rewarded for coming up with an answer that sounds good. And Dan Brown, my friend Dan Brown with the worst SEO, has written several very good books. I feel bad, like whenever I look him up, I have to go through like 10,000 different versions of the Da Vinci Code. And he wrote this great book called Designing Together, which is about design collaboration. It's really good. And he said collaboration requires behavior change. And that's why it's so rare, because as we know, if you're designing products for people out in the world, you know, like, oh, changing people's behavior is really, really hard. It's the same in an organization. So it's really hard, and you have to be intentional about it the same way you have to be intentional about design. You have to have a plan, provide a rationale, define roles and responsibilities, set expectations, communicate progress, reflect on performance. You have to do every single one of these things, or you're not being collaborative. If this isn't part of your process, you're not going to be working collaboratively. But this feels like extra work, and it's like, it's so much easier to just like keep delivering things, right? To keep making things without worrying about being collaborative. And you have to embrace conflict. This is the counterintuitive part, is that being collaborative involves conflict. Because the difference between a collaborative process and a consensus-driven process, like we've all heard, like, oh, consensus-driven design is really, really bad. That's because if you're trying to achieve consensus, what you're trying to achieve is everyone agreeing. If you're trying to collaborate, what you're doing is working towards a shared goal. And those two things are very, very different. As long as you agree on the goal, you can have a really productive exchange of strongly held ideas in the service of that goal. But the problem is a lot of times this sort of interaction is defined as soft skills, and people don't really learn how to have good conflict. So it gets personal, it gets toxic, and then people just avoid it, and they optimize for agreeing. And that's where you get the consensus-driven design process, because you're like, oh, but we all agreed, why is the design bad? Well, because you were aiming to agree, you weren't aiming to achieve your goal together. And this stuff's all really, really hard, but not for the reasons people think it's hard. It's not hard because the technique to learn is hard, like the research process is hard or the software is hard. It's hard because we have to overcome something very deep inside ourselves that isn't often recognized. And then the really hard part, so once you embrace, like, yes, I have intellectual curiosity, I will be in the place of uncertainty, I will gather the data, I will ask the questions, and then you bring the data to somebody else, and you're like, I found the data, and they just reject it. And you're like, wait a second, I did everything right. But the problem is, when you're trying to influence decision-making, you're up against people who want to have the right idea, and you're up against the fact that new data doesn't change minds. Like, there are plenty of social science studies that show this. Like, if you come to somebody with new information that challenges their beliefs, they'll just reject it, and they'll dig in harder. And so when researchers come into this, they're often not equipped to deal with that political reality. And I've heard some really, really unfortunate stories about that. So this is why we get so many objections to doing research. Like, I've heard all of these again and again, like, oh, we don't have the time. Well, we've got the time to build something, but we don't have the time to determine whether we're building the right thing. Same thing for money, right? We're totally willing to like set fire to money so that we don't have to do research. Oh, we don't have the expertise. Same thing. How do you have the expertise to design and build something, and you don't have the expertise to determine whether you're designing and building the right thing for the right reasons? We have specialists. This is what I mentioned. They're often in another building, generating reports for people to ignore. We'll just A/B test. We have analytics. That's more concrete, right? That's more certain. You know what? Talking to people, gross, messy. Let's make a prototype. Way more fun, right? And making a prototype is a type of research, but it is often a very expensive way to learn. But because a prototype is an answer, it's much more comfortable, and that's really the reason people do it. And of course, even to this day, billionaire geniuses who changed the planet didn't do research, so why should I do research? Geniuses don't have to do research. Genius. I have the answer. So, we hear these objections, but there are so many advantages. It actually makes decisions go faster. Like when I work with clients, I tell them a design project moves at the speed of decision making. If you don't have your research, if you don't have people working from the same information, then you'll take a really, really long time to make a decision, right? If you've done your research, then decisions can go really, really quickly if people are working from the same information. You decrease your risk, you save money, you increase the value of everything. You're making something more valuable. Every member of the team is more valuable. You get continuing returns, because this is the thing about asking questions and learning. If everybody's asking questions and learning, then people are collaborating better and better and getting more and more well-informed and making better decisions. It's not like every time you have to start from scratch. An organization, a team, can develop this knowledge base over time and develop this curiosity and keep asking more and better questions. Everyone is more effective and more efficient. But the reason that you hear these objections, it's all a smokescreen. It's all because people want to preserve that really, really good feeling of being right and don't want to go to the place of being uncertain. And you have to make sure that everybody on a team isn't just working from their personal view. Because you could say, yeah, we all have a shared goal. We all know what we're supposed to be doing. But unless you check, you don't know. Because the goal of doing research together, of asking questions and finding new information and answers together, is to work in a shared reality. And there's often a misconception that any sort of research is unsuccessful unless you discover something like wildly new. And a lot of times decision makers use this as an excuse to not do research, to say, oh, we already know everything. But it's like, does everybody working together to make decisions, to do the work, do they all know the same things? Have you checked? And by working together as a team and asking questions collaboratively, what you do is ensure that you're all working from the same shared reality. Because otherwise, you'll find out way too late that you have very, very different ideas about what the business priorities are, what the customer needs, how you're going to value success. And the place to start, because you can't start by talking somebody into research. Like I said, you can't go to somebody and say, oh, you think you have an answer. Let me actually tell you. So when you go to somebody who thinks they have the answer and you tell them they actually don't and they need to do research, you are telling them that they're ignorant and wrong, and that is not a way to get somebody on your side. Right. This is why if you've ever gone to somebody with authority and said, we really need to do research, what you're telling them is that they're wrong. That is not a place to start collaboration. You have to start from a point of agreement. And the point of agreement I've found, the one common point of agreement, is generally everyone wants to develop better products faster. If you're in an organization or a working environment where that is controversial, take a moment. Maybe find a different one. Like, oh, I want to do worse things slower. I mean, sometimes it feels like organizations do want to do that. And also, no one wants to read a research report. The goal of design research is not to generate reports. Not even researchers like to read research reports. But for some reason, there's this idea about, oh, that's what research is for. It's for making a really good, professional-looking report. But it's not. You're just asking questions and getting new information so you can make better products faster. You know you're successful if you're making better products faster and working more collaboratively. And here, I have a historic video to show you, in case anybody hits this particular objection.
Hi. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Steve Jobs, and this is the first of one of many Chalk Talks we're going to have this year together. The subject of this one is really important, which is who is our target customer, why are they selecting our products over our competitions, and what distribution channels are we going to use to reach these customers. A lot of light bulbs have come on over the last 90 days. I've had the good fortune to be with a lot of you out in the field, meeting customers, getting firsthand information as to what they're doing with our products. You have fed a lot of information to the management of this company. We've done a lot of thinking and looked at the data, and all of a sudden out of this data, some very, very important things have come to light. I want to share them with you today.
Even geniuses do research. And then, because they're geniuses, their marketing tells you there's no research. They just know what they're doing. So a lot of times, design research gets conflated with usability testing or user research. But you kind of have to understand the whole burrito, right? There's your organization, like you and your client or your internal team. There's your users and customers. And then there's the whole real-world context. And these are all the things that you don't control but need to know about. But the good thing is the actual research process is really simple. The most important thing is not to be dogmatic about it, right? There's so many different things you could do, and everybody's looking for what's the method? What's the right method? So I can, again, find my answer and not have to ask questions anymore. Yeah, and then they argue about artifacts and ways like, oh, is it personas? Is it jobs to be done? Meh, 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 meh. You know, designers are always finding ways to like carve out territory and have these arguments about methods in order to avoid, I think, getting down to that really, really scary place. But all you have to do is make sure that you're being goal-driven and being very skeptical. This means always have a goal and always be willing to question your methods and never find something and just like hang on to it and say, no, this is the one right method. Because it's not. Because the process, the simple process, is just forming questions, gathering data, and analyzing the data. That's it. If you do all of these steps, you're doing research correctly. If you skip a step, plenty of people just do the gather data part. If you just do the gather data part, you're not doing research, right? And then you get insights. Those feed into any decision-making process you have, and then hopefully you're more successful because of it. But again, you also have to have a really good decision-making process as well. You can't go out and find all this data and feed it into a process where people are too focused on proving they have the right answer. Research activities are only ways to answer questions. That's it. And you need goals in order to give the research purpose. If you don't have a goal, you can't start down this path at all. And you need questions to give data meaning. So forming questions is the most important part of the process and the most overlooked. Only after you have goals can you form questions. Because all you're trying to do is place better bets on human behavior. That's all business is. You just want to have more well-informed bets because you can never have certainty, right? You can have higher levels of confidence. So you have to ask the right questions. And there's a lot of confusion around this. There's so much more talk about what method than how to form questions. But if you don't ask the right questions, it doesn't matter how good your data is. A good question is specific, it's actionable, it's practical, right? A really bad common question, how do we get millennials to like us? Businesses ask this constantly. It's meaningless, right? It's not specific. Millennials aren't really, they don't have behavioral differences. But it's like, we've come up with a way to avoid asking meaningful questions. A better question is more specific. You might ask, how do recent college graduates decide what to have for dinner? A really good question is asking your team, your organization, what you really know. Get in a room. Like, this could be a really scary question to ask. You don't even have to look outside your team to really say, what do we know and how do we know we know it? The best question is the unknown that carries the most risk. And examples of risks are people don't value what you're making, maybe you're listening to the wrong customers, maybe your business model doesn't support it, maybe somebody else is doing it better, or maybe if you do succeed, you will destroy the planet. That's a good thing to know before you go down a path. And another important thing to think about is what you need to know and what you can ask people are very, very different. Research questions are not interview questions, and an interview might not even be the best way to get the information you need to design. For example, If you want to know how people spend money on vacation, you can't just ask them that because people start lying to you, right? But you might ask them, oh, walk me through your last vacation. You might want to know how likely people are to adopt your product. Like you see this and like, how likely are you? You see this as a literal survey question all the time. Nobody can answer this question. But you have to see what products people already use and then make the judgment to figure out how likely they are. So there are many stages in the process when you can ask questions, like you don't know what to ask, what's going on, how does it happen, how well does our solution work to solve the problem? People jump to this too quickly. Why is this happening? You can't just look at measurements. You can't look at quantitative data and get causation out of it. But if that's what you need to know, you have to know that that's what you need to know before you can ask the right questions. So then the gathering data part. You have to start with your goal, your topic, how much time. The method you use is totally up to these factors, right? You have to start with your goal. You can't start with a method. I've talked to people in so many organizations who say, we talk to customers every Friday. I'm like, why? And it's like, because we feel like we have to. Oh, we run surveys. Why? Oh, we go out and hang out with people in their homes. Really? Is that the best use of your time and money? You know, it all depends. There's no one right method. It's whichever one answers your question and is the most practical and useful. And you have to think about whether you need to know something quantitative or qualitative. So the nice thing, again, about dealing with research and data, it sounds so complicated. It's really not when you get down to kind of the base principles. The only types of data you have to deal with are data you can measure and data you can't measure. And you've got to be really clear on which answers your question. This is from the Manga Guide to Statistics, which I highly recommend. You need both. You need descriptions and measurements. One is not better than the other. You need to know whether you're asking a question that demands a measurement or a question that demands a description. Measurements will never tell you why. And then you choose the activities that will give you the kind of answers that answer the type of question you have. And one of the problems is that because of this sort of anxiety about research and asking questions, is that people doing qualitative research try to apply a quantitative standard to it because it feels more sciencey. And so the idea that you have a fixed and measurable reality that you need to do a quantitative study, people misapply that to qualitative research. And that's why you get things like people in labs more than they should be out in the field. That's why you get eye tracking totally unnecessarily when you can just do a usability test, because there's a sense of if it's more controlled, it's more sciencey and it's more accurate. But that is not right. Quantitative data doesn't capture the context. And the most important thing is not to just go on fishing trips. You can't just look at data and expect to learn anything. That's just going to be a way for your biases to creep in because you'll be looking to be proven right. You won't be looking for the right answer out in the world. And why not just make a prototype? Yeah, that's a way of learning. Prototyping's cool. Prototype and test. Prototypes are comfortable because it's an answer, right? You want to go straight to the answer and, oh, let's just see how right I am. That's what a prototype's really asking. And Victor Lombardi had a great quote for this. If we only test bottle openers, we never realize customers prefer screw-top bottles. And I can tell you, when I get home from a long day working with clients, you know, I will pick the bottle. I can just crack it right open. I don't want I don't want like a $300 fancy rabbit wine opener. But this is actually, because people are so irrational, this has actually led to another design problem, which is sommeliers in high-end restaurants. They can't bring out like, oh, you ordered a $500 wine. Let me crack that open for you. So there's now a new tool which opens a screw-top bottle with a certain amount of flourish. It's true, because people, not rational. Not rational. Nobody makes rational decisions. And it's so easy to mistake the polish of a prototype for the quality of an idea. Right? You're like, oh, and then people get precious about it. Nobody wants to critique a prototype that looks beautiful if the idea at the core is not a good idea. And surveys. I'll take a moment for surveys. The problem with surveys is they're too easy to run. And they generate data that's so measurable and countable and feels so certain that they're just comfortable. It's like, look at all these answers. Oh, I got bad answers at scale. That's cool. That makes me feel good. And you see like, man, I see these all the time. Somebody wrote to me about 4C surveys, and these pop up on every single site. And 4C is very popular because it purports to do the alchemy of turning qualitative into quantitative, right? So if you look at these questions, rate how well the site's organized, rate how well the site, who thinks like this? No human thinks like this. And my favorite, rate the number of clicks. Who can answer that? People are going to like pick 2. Yeah, it only took me 2 clicks. Cool. These are terrible, but they're so popular because they give answers that feel good. And so if you're thinking about running a survey, don't do it because running a survey is easy. Do it because it's the best way to answer a question. And if you do run the survey, focus on asking things that people can actually answer. And ask it at the right time. Just send out a blanket survey to people. You will not get good data, but it will feel really good. You'll be like, oh, whew, I didn't have to talk to people. People are terrifying. And then you have to analyze. You have to go to this step. You can't just ask questions and look at data. You then have to ask what the data means. And you have to do this with your team so everybody understands what it means. And you don't have people drawing different conclusions, and then you end up doing all this research and fighting about personal opinion anyway and wasting all this time and then saying like, oh, let's not even do research. It was a total waste of time. Knowledge is not useful unless it's shared. If knowledge is just in one person's head, it will not benefit the team, it will not save time. It's not about having an answer, it's about having everybody working in a shared reality. And the best way to analyze, especially qualitative data or any data, is to talk it through with everyone who has to make choices and decisions based on that data. But sometimes you work with your team and then you have to report it to other people. And you've got to remember that data doesn't change minds. So you can't just be collaborative with your team and say, oh, we're totally on board, we're asking questions, we're being uncomfortable, we're being open to new information, and then we're going to take it to a decision maker, whew, and they go like, meh. Like I talked to a researcher once who was working at a big tech company, and she was talking to this VP of product, and she saw his roadmap, and she's like, oh, wow, I have data that totally contradicts that. So she made an appointment with him for the following Monday morning, went back over her data, made a big report, came in Monday to find out that he'd canceled the meeting. Power trumps data. It does. And she was blindsided because she didn't have anything. She's like, all I have is getting the best quality data. I don't have the tools to overcome politics and overcome a fear of being open to asking questions and being open to not knowing things. So if you have to go in and talk somebody into your findings, always start from common ground. Always start from agreeing and then introduce new information, because you cannot win arguments with data. You can only win arguments with questions and by starting with common ground. Start with shared goals. Tell a story. Like, be fun. I've been to so many boring research reports, right? They come in, they do a presentation, they talk to their methodology. Don't be afraid of putting on a show. People like shows. And then keep it brief, keep it to the point. And create a habit of collaboration, because again, it's too easy to do the things that you're rewarded to do for yourself and not collaborate with your team. Because a lot of times there are not incentives in place for collaboration. So it's a discipline that gets easier over time, the same way that asking questions gets easy. So you always have to keep why you're doing what you're doing at the center of everything you do. And if you create this as a practice and you develop this intellectual curiosity and you think like, wow, it's not just creativity, it's curiosity that everybody needs to cultivate. That's an innate thing that kind of can get, smushed down by wrong incentives. You think, okay, it's fun. It's more fun to do things, to design things, to put things out in the world when we know why we're doing it. And then we have a better chance of conveying to other people out in the world why they should care. And this will be better for everything. Thank you.
Erica, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Does anyone have any questions for Erica? Just go ahead and raise your hand, and I will bring you a microphone.
Hi. So first I want to say I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
And what you hit on were a lot of things that were very useful that I can take away with the way I deal with my team. But sometimes, and more common than I like to admit, a client says, no, I have this terrible idea, and I know you're making a great thing, but I don't want a great thing. I want this terrible idea. And that becomes a situation where, okay, disagreement and pushback can lead to chargeback and losing client, right? How do you deal with that and stay honest to these principles?
The way we've always done it is organizational research is non-negotiable in our process. We go right away and we tell them, because we explain like what slows things down is the speed of decision making, and we need to be well informed, and in order to serve you we need to understand you, because what's a good solution for one organization might not be a good one for another. And so we start by understanding them and really understanding what their goal is, because if the goal is not more important than that person, that decision maker's solution, you will never win. You just won't. And you have to establish that in the beginning. You have to lay the groundwork. We talk about creating a framework for decision making. And so we go in and we talk to the client and we talk about the decision. This is why the message I'm trying to hammer home with designers as much as possible is take the emphasis off the deliverables onto the decision making. So we talk to the client and we're like, here's the goal. What are all the decisions we need to reach that goal? What are all the artifacts we're going to be creating to support the decisions? So we take the artifacts and knock their importance back a little bit and say, you need to make a good decision. We're going to show you things that help you make that decision. Okay, what evidence are we going to base that decision on? And so we have to explicitly know how a client team makes decisions before we insert any recommendations into that process. Because if they're not making decisions based on evidence, there is nothing you can do. You have to understand what the standard is for decision making. And it's hard. And once the horse is out of the barn or whatever, you can't put it back. You can't say, oh, we're shifting the basis of truth. You have to start at the beginning and say, let's agree on what our basis of truth is before you show them any artifact, or else it'll be all on polish and not on concept.
Thank you so much. Can we get another round of applause for Erica?
And I'm hanging out too, because I know we're on time now, and so if you just want to ask questions, I'll be here in whatever location they tell me is most convenient for everybody. Thank you so much.
And everyone, I know we still have a few people trickling in. And welcome. Today we're with Jonathan DeRosiers, and he's been using WordPress since 2007 to build sites of all types and sizes. He is a WordPress core contributor since 2013, and he made his first commit to WordPress core just over a week ago. The dates seem a little weird on that, but he co-organizes the Boston WordPress meetup, frequently speaks and volunteers at the Rhode Island, Cape Cod, and South Coast WordPress meetups, and is the lead organizer of WordCamp Boston 2019. In the summer, you'll most likely find him at a baseball field, and in the winter, you'll find him looking out the window, waiting for the snow to melt so he can go play baseball. Please welcome Jonathan DeRosiers.
Hello. I appreciate you being here. This is not an easy weekend. It's a lot of work to sit in chairs and listen and observe knowledge, so I appreciate you making it this far. We'll call it the co-main event. So who's a developer here? Okay, who's a designer? Okay, and any project managers or bloggers? Okay, so we have a good mix. I hope everybody will get something out of this, so don't worry if you're not a developer. So we're going to do a little time travel today. We've all wanted to time travel, I'm sure. We're going to go back to 2016. And in 2016, I accepted a job at Boston University. They have been entirely WordPress for over 10 years now. And with a few exceptions, some tools, everything's WordPress. So they have a multi-network, multi-site instance, so it's quite large. There's some quite intimidating things in there that I still didn't understand when I left, but it was always interesting. And I'm going to talk about two departments today. So one department is IS&T, we'll call it, Information Services and Technology. And that was the typical IT department within the university. They handled the machines, they handled the infrastructure, support for students and staff. And then there was a department called External Affairs. And everything within there was basically everything that had to do with communications. We had a department that focused on lobbying and making sure that the people passing bills knew about what we were working on, and we looked out for the best interests of the university. And we interacted with IS&T very frequently, on a daily basis pretty much. So this was our GitHub organization. And this was as of a few weeks ago. So there's a few new faces that I did not work with, but there's also a few faces that had left as well. And within External Affairs was Interactive Design, and that was the department I was in. And that department functioned like an agency. We did everything from wireframing to the sites to building plugins. We interacted directly with our clients. The clients were the colleges, schools, universities, special initiatives, periodical magazines that we posted online. And so we did everything. We did photography, we did videography, and the whole gamut. We had people to do everything. Everybody was very talented. It was great. So that clientele, in addition to that, the publications and stuff, they had three options. They could get in line and wait for us to help them. They could use a pre-built theme that we controlled and we deployed, and it was kind of like .com. We only allowed certain themes to be on the platform. We also had an internal framework that we built that worked very well and had all of our features for our different plugins. Or they could work external with external agencies. We had a few relationships, but then they would pay full price if they worked with us. It was subsidized by the university. And the point with that was everybody could afford a best-in-class website, and the university would have a solid web presence, a best-in-class web presence. So within ID was me. And after I got settled, I sat with my supervisor, and he said, I'm going to give you an assignment, just to see what you think and get a fresh eyes on what we're working on. So he said that we have this theme. It's just about ready to go live a couple weeks from now. I want you to just look at it, make some points, and tell me what we should improve on, what we should do different. So I took some time, and I came up with a list. And basically, it was much more detailed than this, but they fell into 3 different buckets. We had code style issues, we had some missing best practices or incorrect best practices, and there were some performance improvements that I suggested. So we sat down and we went over the list, and we talked about it, and he said, yes, these are all things we're aware of. I'm glad you brought them up. Let's fix some of them right now. If we're missing some, we have security issues or anything like that, let's fix that. But let's table this, and we'll return a little bit later to that when we have some time to address it properly. So fast forward about 6 months, I had mentioned that if you went with us, you would just have to wait your turn. We had a queue. At that 6-month time, we had a 2-year wait list. So if there were no additions or no delays, nobody jumped the line because they were important at the university, we had a 2-year wait. So this wasn't sustainable. It wasn't fair to the departments and the schools that were waiting their turn, and they had to get out sooner than that. So we pitched some ideas to the university. We got approved to double. So we were about 26 in ID at the time. There was 4 or 5 developers. So we were going to essentially double. So at that point, we brought this list back up, and we said, we have to fix this now, because if we start scaling our department and we're not doing things consistently, we're not enforcing best practices, we're going to have some serious problems down the road, and we're going to have to quadruple in order to even maintain that. So we sat down, we started coming up with some plans and discussing it some more. But these were more common in our code than we thought. So after I did my first assignment, I started to notice these, and I would flag certain things to Steve, and I would say, hey, here's another example of this, but let's start making a list as we work on things of areas we want to improve, repositories and sites we want to fix. But basically, we had to solve this and prevent that long-term technical debt that we would build up. So we sat down and we established our goal, which was we needed a structured, mandatory code review process to enforce consistency, improve code quality, promote learning, knowledge, sharing, and collaboration. As I mentioned, we do a lot of knowledge sharing with IS&T. Every other week, we would have a meeting with them, and we would present something we were working on, talk about it, how can we utilize it within the university. We wanted to do more of that. But above all, we didn't want it to inhibit our team members from getting work done. We wanted it to feel natural. We wanted it to feel effective. We wanted it to be a positive experience. And we wanted the team to get better and write better quality code. So we started making a list of our challenges. We wanted to keep these in mind as we went through this process. So our first one was it was not uncommon for you to work on many things at a time. So it was functioning like an agency. As agency owners know, you have 4 or 5 projects going on at a time. These could be, wireframing stage. This could be design stage or development stage. So again, we didn't want to inhibit work from getting done, no matter what the stage of the project was. We don't just have developers that write code. In interactive design, there are designers. There's something called a producer, and they would do a lot of email campaigns and stuff like that with HTML and CSS. And the department's also structured in a way where producers or designers could switch disciplines and go more into developer or designer or vice versa. So again, if we have our GitHub organization, this is interactive design within that organization. These are the people that identified as designers. These are producers or other people that would help out. And these are developers. And again, there's 2 in here that are working there now since I've left, and there's 1 in there and myself that have moved on. So at any time, it was 3, 4, 5-ish, and it wasn't a constant number. But you can see the difference of we have many more people of other disciplines than we do of developers. So that was something to keep in mind in this process. There's lots of variation of experience. So we had entry level, we had more senior developers, even designers. We had senior designers and junior designers. So that was another thing we wanted to make sure that the junior people were not getting left behind, and likewise the senior people were not being burdened with more work. This is something I ran into a lot. Some projects are very long term. They take a long time to, who here has ever worked in higher ed? Okay, so they feel my pain. That's more than I expected. But it's not uncommon for a project to take a couple years. There's many stakeholders, and sometimes it just takes a long time to get approval for certain things. So the issue I ran into was it was very hard for me to dig up explanations for why things were a certain way. People would come and go in the university, and if there was no documentation in the code, which was not uncommon, unfortunately, you would have a hard time figuring out why a line was a certain way. You could tell that it was very purposeful. It was meant to be there that way, but you couldn't figure out if you took it out of there what would break, and so sometimes that was a little fun. We also looked at some technical factors. There were some technologies we were just stuck with. We were WordPress, for example. We were not interested in migrating. We were we were all in on WordPress. We were also all in on GitHub. We had all of our repositories on GitHub. One of my first tasks was to move our remaining SVN repos over. We used Slack. We used SAS. And there were some design tools that we also wanted to keep using. We weren't interested in switching those. We also considered some human elements. So we wanted this process to empower our team members to grow, to be better, to help each other. And it's a big opportunity for them to learn. So in day-to-day, it's hard to put aside time to learn. But if you're doing work while you're learning, you make good use of your time. Motivated people love to learn. So this helped with retention. If we're enabling our employees to learn, they're going to stay longer. And it also helps people learn how things are working internally. If you're newer, it's going to help you get up to speed with how things are done, how people work. And it will help make more informed decisions later on in future projects. As I mentioned, it's also an opportunity for more knowledge sharing. Everybody on the team was very good at what they do. And we wanted to harness that in some way where they could provide feedback like this, but not be burdened again with putting that time aside and having to sit down and knowledge share. Improved collaboration. So like I said, we interacted a lot with IS&T. They helped us build plugins and different infrastructure aspects for the different projects. But we wanted to work with them more. They are also very smart. They knew a lot of things that we didn't know, and we wanted to learn from that. It's also improved your onboarding. Onboarding is very expensive. It's very difficult, very time-consuming. So if you have a structured set of rules and guidelines, you can throw someone into the process a lot sooner than that. They can learn from this process. They can read the documentation. They can learn from the more senior members as they review their code. New people that come in that have new skill sets, the senior people can learn from them, and we can start to use their skill sets throughout our new projects. So then we had our steps. So we know what our challenges are. We know what we need to do. So we need to make our rules. We're going to create the process, document it, and then train. So this is where it gets good. We wanted to identify the tools we need. So we made our rules. The first one was everyone must use the same code style. This just saves time across the board. If I write code and then someone else writes another line of code and they're spaced differently and they're laid out differently, I have to think about it when I switch projects or I look at their code. But if everybody lays it out the same, they use the same style guides, that cognitive block is gone when you first switch into that project. So that's one aspect of that. It's also you would have things exactly where you expected them to be. So we had guidelines about how to organize our file structure, and it made it easier for the producers to jump in and know where the email templates would be, and vice versa. And that was something that was very important to us. Everyone must follow the best practices. These two together are basically coding standards. I've given some talks about that in the past, so I encourage you to go look at those in more detail. These are the rules in place that enforce consistency, and they prevent a lot of common mistakes. A lot of these are in place because of lessons that have been learned by people out in the wild. They contribute them back, and they publish them, and people learn from them, and that's why they're there. Everyone must use the same workflow, and I'm not talking about open Photoshop, save it into your folder, and publish it to the network drive. I'm talking about our GitHub flow for this. I'll talk about this more later on. Everything must be properly documented. As I mentioned before, it was very difficult often to go into a project and understand what was happening and why. We required that every pull request was going to need to be updated documentation. It also helped us ask the question, does it need user documentation? Does it need developer documentation? These were things that we wanted to enforce as we committed code to the repos. If you go to do documentation at the end of a project, that's really a drag. Nobody likes to do that. It's time consuming, it's much harder, and it takes more time often. So if you document as you go, the code is fresh in your mind, what's happening is fresh in your mind, and it's much easier to get it in at that point. And a bonus one, it didn't apply to everything, but if appropriate, it would be accompanied by tests. So this mainly applied to our plugin repositories and not so much our themes. So we sat down and we started to brainstorm our process. And we go back to that question, what is the correct way to Git for us? So there's a bunch of different ways to use Git. IS&T was using the more traditional way. We were using a flatter way, and a lot of people just committed right to master. Our plugins would use pull requests, but they used something in IS&T that was basically, this is more traditional. So if you use Git branching, this is more what's built in. But these branches have categories. There's features, there's hotfixes, and there's releases. And they're types. They're classified. They have a specific purpose. They go into specific branches, and there's specific flows to each of those. This doesn't really work with GitHub. GitHub's more flat, so we didn't want to use this. We wanted to get away from this. This is the GitHub flow. So you make a branch, and it goes right back into the primary branch, and you just go. It simplifies it. It makes it easier for more people to understand Git. And so we went with this because, again, Git was our tool. That was a technical limitation, and we just thought that this worked best. We had a few adjustments, though. So, for example, we had different primary branches. So on plugins, we had develop as our primary branch, and themes was master. Again, all code must go through a pull request. There's no committing directly to master. You can lock this down in GitHub, so only administrators were allowed to force push to master. So if a designer accidentally committed code to master, they wouldn't be able to push it. They would have to recommit it to a branch and then have a PR. And then if for our plugins, when develop is the primary branch, we would always open a code PR to master when it was ready. We'd do a final code review, and then we would version it. We would use that PR to increment the version number and update the change log. Again, we're updating the documentation as we go. We're not going back later and doing it when we find out we really need it. And then finally, we would create a release in GitHub. So the next question was, what are our coding standards? What do we want to enforce? This was really easy. WordPress already has coding standards, and so we decided to use those. They are maintained by the community. They're best practices within the community. So this was easy for us to choose. We wanted we wanted our team members to become accustomed to the way WordPress writes code, so that they might be less intimidated to jump into WordPress core and contribute back. They could open up core files, and it would match what our coding style was, and they would be able to learn from the code and what's actually going on. There were some differences. We had a separate GitHub repository for our coding standards, and within that we We had things like PHP namespaces. Those were required in our plugins, but WordPress does not have that in their coding standards because it still supports PHP 5.2. So that was a difference that we had. We had several differences we wanted to have, and we would document them there. Continuous integration, we used Travis. We didn't have a reason to switch, and we decided to just keep going with that. So then we started thinking about how do we enforce our rules. We have these rules, but how do we make sure people follow them? We looked at several different things. We ended up implementing basic PHP linting in Grunt. So anyone that was running Grunt Watch and editing templates, they would know if they had a fatal PHP error in their code. But it was very basic. It was only PHP fatal errors, basically. We knew that PHP-CS was the proper tool. But this is really intimidating for designers and producers. We didn't want them to have to dive into this and figure out what's going on. There's also the barrier of having them install it all on their machine. So we didn't want to do that. It wasn't simple enough for us. We also didn't want to encourage them to use the auto code fixer, the PHP code beautifier. We wanted them to go in and fix the errors themselves so that they could learn from that and hopefully not make those mistakes later on. Many people learn from doing, including myself, and so we wanted to encourage that process. So we looked at some tools. We decided to use Code Climate. It's similar to Scrutinizer, and there's a few others out there. But basically, it would give you a dashboard. It would analyze your code on every commit. It would give you metrics. It would point out issues. And this included PHP-CS. They had several different engines built in. We used the ESLint one, the Markdown lint for our README files, and SASLint in addition to the PHP-CS. And we used this to catch our mundane issues that we didn't want the pull request reviewer to have to worry about. So similar to, we didn't want people, when they switch projects, to have to think about the code style. We wanted all those things to be fixed before they hopped in to review the code. So this is an example of some issues that would be listed. Another benefit of this is that on themes, we didn't have Travis most of the time because it just wasn't necessary at the time. So we needed a way to have a separate integration in GitHub. So this allowed us to do that. We also didn't want to have the Travis build fail if there were coding standards issues, because there were instances where we chose not to fix certain violations, just let them in, we'll fix them later, or it was something we didn't follow and we couldn't override in the standards. So this was great. It also, on a quick view, it lets the person see whether there's code style issues or whether there's test issues, and it's easier to break down. You can also click in here and click the link on the PR. It will tell you what issues you introduced in that PR and then which ones you fixed. And then after it's merged, you have the line showing what the status is when it was merged. You could also do hook in your test coverage, and it would tell you you can enforce a minimum percentage of new code that had to be tested, accompanied by tests. So that was good for our plugins. And then the other benefit that was really big for us was there's something called the prepare step, and you could specify the configuration files in a separate repository. So in our coding standards repo, we had a folder with all of these linting configuration files. So every single repo across our GitHub install that we wanted to follow these, we would include the same file. This was great because if the rule set was updated, the WordPress rule set was updated, we could just make our changes or our overrides in one location, and then every time the next time that the repository was updated, it would pull it for every single repo. So we had our process down. We moved into documentation. We set up a contributing file, but similar to the coding standards configurations, we didn't include it in every repo, and every repo had a link to this. It said, here's our contributing guidelines. We have them at this location. And so again, we have a single point to update. It's not a burden to update these things as we make changes and we evolve. We just link to it. And again, documentation, we wanted it to be updated on every single pull request. So especially in plugins, this becomes important. We have a running list that we have in an unreleased version, and if you add on each pull request what you're changing, when you make the release, it's much easier to compile those changes. Sometimes we deal with this in WordPress. We have to go back and look at all the tickets and figure out what changed and make the call-outs of what the major things are. But with this, we were just able to copy them, put them into the release, and releasing doesn't take much time because our documentation is already done. So then we started training people. We had face-to-face training. We introduced it to a few people, tried it out, and then we introduced it to everybody, and we started having live sessions where people would commit. We would go through the process. We would test it. People would ask questions. We made ourselves available to anyone that was making changes and had questions. That helped a lot. We also showed IS&T at one of our knowledge sharing meetings what was going on. And then we went into our beta testing phase, and it worked, but we found a lot of new things. So let's go over the new things we found. We wanted to limit the PR scope. Nobody should submit a 5,000-line code review. Nobody's going to read that. Nobody should have to read that. That's very difficult to review. It might happen sometimes, but that should be very rare. You shouldn't be creating a burden for the code reviewer. The code should be easy to review, easy to digest, and you're more likely to introduce errors into your code base if you have larger commits, larger PRs. Include a URL to test. Whenever possible, you should have a staging environment for someone to just click it, verify the code works, try to break it, and just make sure that the PR is doing what it says it does, only what it says what it does. Avoid the LGTM. So this one, this one's fun. Sometimes PRs are very, very minimal, and that's okay. But if your code is more than 1 or 2 lines, you should really try to say something positive or confirm that it works. This PR does this and this. It helps the person know that you actually reviewed the code, you actually put thought into it, and you didn't just look at it and checked it off. A good way to test this is to make a PR and describe something that the code does not do and see if you get it looks good to me. If you do, then we need to step back and we need to talk about that. Or put a little small bug in there and see if it gets passed, even though that shouldn't get passed. Where possible, you want to make suggestions, but you don't want to do the work for them. Again, we want them to go back. We want to make changes. We want to make the improvements so that they learn by doing. And it's also not your responsibility as the reviewer. The responsibility is the person that wrote the code and worked on the pull request. That could be multiple people, but as code reviewers, it's not our job to go in and actually fix it for them. In GitHub, they have a new feature where you can actually make suggestions in line, and the person that created the pull request can accept those changes and merge them right in. So this makes that a lot faster. Again, you're not actually writing it, but in some situations, you might need to visualize what you're describing, and this could be helpful there. We started enforcing a rule to delete your branches after you merged. This became important because you didn't want to have thousands of branches over time. Project goes on for a long time. However many branches you end up using over time, if you didn't delete those, they would just pile up, and you wouldn't be able to tell what had been merged very easily. You'd have to look at each branch in the Git tree. So as soon as it's done, delete it. It prevents people from committing new code to it. They have to open a new branch and a new pull request. It's done. Once it's merged, you close it, no new code. Always start from a new branch. We developed some rules. These are loose, but basically use common sense, have good naming conventions on your branches. I like to use the GitHub issue number and then a brief description. When some people did fix / when we released plugins, we always prefixed it with release /. And it just, again, it kind of did what the other Git method of Git did. It categorized the branches, but just through the names. We had some responsibility guidelines. It's the responsibility of the creator to keep it up to date. prevent merge conflicts. So if there's merge conflicts, you have to go back in and update it before the person reviews it. And after you get the thumbs up and you get the approval, it's your job to do some final testing, merge the branch, and delete the branch. This one we never encountered, but basically what would happen if two people disagreed, the reviewer and the person that opened the pull request disagreed? What we did was we didn't want it to be an argument, we wanted it to be a discussion. So all the opinions should be documented with reasons why on the pull request, and then a third party could get called in and make the final decision. It's not about being right, it's not about getting your way, it's more about doing what's best for that project, which is the most future-proof, and which is easier to pivot from into a different approach if it's not the correct way to tackle it. We also wanted to encourage good etiquette when writing about people's code. Language is very important and tone is very important. We didn't want people feeling, oh, John hates me because he always gives me bad pull request reviews. And a lot of times we lose that. We lose those little nuances in written communication where we're in Slack all the time and we may word something a certain way and it gets taken the wrong way only because they can't see me and they can't read my body language. So we wanted to encourage people to be positive and don't add stress to the person that opened the pull request. So one important one was to not review the person. You want to review the code only. Someone worked hard on that code review, and you don't want to make the code seem like it's bad. I mean, it might be bad, but you can word it in a way that's more encouraging. So this is a bad example. I couldn't find real examples, but I'm sure you could find examples like this out in the wild in open source. So this is a little bit better. It's less aggressive, but you're still attacking the person, you're addressing the person, the feedback at the person. Clearly describe your problems and your questions. Say what we need to do, why. Ask the question, is this meant to be? What would happen here? Is this on purpose? Engage the person. Avoid you. If you say we, it feels more like we're in this together and we're working together on this. It's not, you need to do this, you need to do that. We should try to do this better. So again, you should use output escaping here. We should use output escaping here. Sometimes your reviews will be critical, and that's okay. But you have to make sure you engage the person. If you engage the person, they're going to receive that criticism much better. Again, in the last example, we clearly state the problem. If Boolean value is passed to the function, it looks like it would be converted to a string. Is this intended behavior? If so, can we document it? So this is a very simple example, but in pull requests, you'll encounter much more in-depth questions and situations. But again, if you're engaging the person, then they're gonna receive that feedback a lot better. We also found out that there were some additional factors to this succeeding. These were not so much into the process itself or in the day-to-day, but more within the entire department and the people above, the people doing the code. This one's very important. So if everybody's not on board, then there's going to be people disagreeing. There's going to be people doing things different ways. All the benefits of the pull request process are going to disappear, all because I'm not doing it the way everybody else is. And it takes time. So it takes buy-in from everybody, even project managers, even management. This is now something that we do, and we have to account for it in our projects, in our weekly timesheets, everything like that. I skipped ahead, but this is just like wireframes now. This is part of the process. We need to clearly set expectations. You're introducing a lot of tools, you're introducing a lot of new things. Make sure that the team members know how to interpret this data and what to do with these tools. This one was pretty common. So this screen right here has a lot of information. We have our test coverage, we have our maintainability score, which is basically how long Code Climate thinks it will take to fix the issues that it finds. We have our graphs, we have numbers, all these things. But a lot of people got hung up on the C. So we had a couple situations where people were just spending time in opening pull requests just to get this letter higher. We all want to do good. We all want to get high scores. It's just a part of human nature. And so people wanted to have A's. So we had to step back and say, hey, that's not the goal here. This is a tool to help us find potential issues, but it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. The high number is not the important part. The important part is that our code gets better. We have less problems that will hurt us down the road. And so you have to take these with a grain of salt. You have to know what they mean, interpret them, and know what to do with this information. And finally, everyone reviews code that's able to. This is the most senior person to the newest person. It's not the intern's responsibility to do all the code reviews. Everybody's learning from each other, and that was the most important one here. The other benefit of this is we have these PRs, these points in time, and we could integrate with different tools. So we had Travis, but we also we had pull request templates. So when they clicked new pull request or new template, it would show you what information you had to put. This is one from Gutenberg. We also experimented with automated documentation. So this was set up on our plugin repositories where when you committed to master and you tagged, this would run on Travis, and it would automatically commit and push back to GitHub pages. So as long as we did our job and we included all the inline documentation, that information would get extracted into this codex, and it was all done automatically after you set it up. So this was a great benefit. People could refer to this without having to download the repository or jump into the code. It was just available for the team members to use. We looked into some accessibility scanning. This is a tool called Pally. We didn't quite get this working, but we wanted to run this on our framework where we could scan it with code changes so we could see if we were introducing any accessibility issues. They also have a dashboard where you can set up different sites, you can continually scan, and it can show you metrics as far as which sites have more issues. We worked on trying to automatically deploy to staging. This was difficult, and we decided not to do it because we had too many sources of truth. We had our production site, but it wasn't uncommon to clone that site to staging, make many changes, and get it ready for the next version before moving it over to production. And then it also wasn't uncommon for each team member to have their own sandbox that they would clone into and do some work before they committed the code or before they made it on staging or production. So we didn't know how we would define what site the content would come from to test against. We looked at a tool called Alex, which basically will run and try to catch wording issues and language issues. We experimented with adding this in our commit messages. So it was a pre-commit hook. It would scan whatever the person wrote in as their commit message and maybe make some suggestions of ways to better word things. This is also can be built into many of the code editors. They have add-ons for Atom and all those. And as you write, it can tell you how to be more sensitive and more inclusive. With our framework, our theme framework, we wanted to look into visual regression testing so we can make sure we didn't make any mistakes. So this is something by Andrew Taylor and Pantheon. They had this scrubber that you could see the differences. It would highlight the visual differences. So we would make sure that the changes were intentional. If what was on the screen was changing, we could confirm that yes, that's what we wanted to happen. And then finally, one thing that we added was, again, we wanted to empower our team members to learn and get better. So we ended up, we bought a Treehouse license. That we found that their courses more closely aligned with our standards and our goals and how our team worked. So we had some team licenses, and interactive design was very 9 to 5. We didn't want people going home, working on the weekends, getting burnt out. So this was a little tricky because we didn't want to say, hey, go home and learn new things and come back. We said, hey, this is available to you. You can use it if you want. And what we found was, a lot of people would actually go home and say, hey, I was on Treehouse last night. And again, they wanted to learn. They were motivated. They went home. They learned JavaScript. They learned WordPress theming. So this was a great benefit that we added, and it had nothing to do with our process, but it was just an add-on that we had that we made available. And finally, everyone makes mistakes. This isn't about being perfect. This isn't about not making mistakes. This makes everything succeed. And again, everybody has to buy in and have the same attitude. I can't stress this enough. I would have 5 slides if I could, but that wouldn't make sense. So, thank you. That's an old link. I will tweet a new link.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Does anyone have any questions for Jonathan?
We had one in the middle.
Hi, thank you. And so do you all ever have to work on sites that you've outsourced that have come back to you? And if so, like, how do you handle that process now? Because we kind of deal with that.
Yeah, so we would work with specific vendors that we knew worked well and with us and worked with the same standards and guidelines. That helped a lot. But we also had we encouraged those projects to be done on our framework, our theme framework. So all our themes were child themes of that framework. And as long as they were building from that, we knew that they were somewhat following the same methodologies and things like that, unless there was something really advanced that required a custom plugin or something like that. So choosing who you work with is important. People that value the same things and follow the same guidelines.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Can you talk a little bit more about why you chose to manage your plugins and themes on the separate branches?
Yeah, so with plugins, it wasn't uncommon for us to make many changes before we wanted to release. We didn't want to release every change. We wanted to do them in versions. So, for example, BU Profiles was a plugin. Maybe we wanted to change the thumbnail size, and then we wanted to change the input fields, and we would do that all, and we would release it as one version. So master was always our source of truth in themes and plugins. That was our latest deployable code. And as we made changes, we wanted to test it against other environments, many sites. And so we would do that in develop. We would have develop deployed to our staging area. And if we found any errors, we would fix them. And then when we were ready, we would merge that into master. And then we'd have a new version that we would deploy. Themes that didn't really make sense because there was so many changes. Designers would make CSS changes, commit it, and it was inhibitive of getting the code out quickly because it didn't make sense for make one CSS change and then merge it into master, and we just did it right into master.
How do you deal with the time management of the review process itself? Like, if you're implementing it for the first time, especially if you're on a smaller team, you know it's going to bite out a large chunk of people's time. So how would you go about handling that with a small team?
Yeah, so at the beginning I mentioned that we only had a couple people involved with it. We tried it out with a few projects, and we realized that as we added more projects to it, we had to have everybody on board, and that's when we sat down and we trained everyone. If you have a smaller team, it might be hard to justify it, but it will be worth it in the future. You'll have the documentation. You'll have the big part about this is you have a pull request with all the discussion, and you have a history you can refer back to. So it will save you time in researching why things were a certain way later. It's tough to justify, but maybe it's at the beginning you're putting in 4 or 5 extra hours a week or something like that. But as you scale, it will be worth it to have all that history there.
Do you have educational resources that you like for developers who are beginning this type of process and beginning this process of managing other developers and incorporating a code culture into an organization?
It's a good question. I like to look at what other organizations are doing, what open source projects are doing. A lot of these tools I found from just doing that. And then I would research them, how they worked, how we could implement them in our process. I mean, you could read about people skills and like how to word things with people. There's no real one resource because this is coming from all different aspects. There's technical, there's interpersonal skills, there's all those things. I'm happy to sit with you and give you some more. I don't have like one resource that I used. I kind of just pieced everything together with my teams. So that's a hard question, but those are things that I did to find some ideas. Someone else? There's got to be one more. One more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan.